Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. My name is Trisha Howard, aka Trisha Kicks Sass, and welcome to a very special episode of the SIG download. May the torque be with you. I am so excited to have my twin accidentally join me today, Mike Salvatore. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Good. How's it going for you?
I'm doing great, especially since we accidentally showed up wearing the same thing. I know nobody will believe this, but we actually did not plan this.
This was not.
I was very excited to have Mike on because he is responsible for one of my favorite projects here at Akamai and really in the security community, Infection Monkey. So I wanted to show support. So yeah, Mike, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself really quickly and something you really love about your job.
Sure. Well, I'm Mike Salvatore, and I work as an architect in software development for Infection Monkey, which is an open source project that Akamai puts out for the community. I love software development. I think it's a really interesting discipline and has lots of interesting problems, and I love security. And so Infection Monkey brings those two things together, and that's great. And best of all, it's like free and open source. So the work we do, on our team gets used by anybody who wants it, free of charge. And I love being able to give something back to the community that way.
Yes, I do too. I absolutely do too. And this is like the closest thing you'll get to a sales pitch on this show. The link for Infection Monkey is in our show notes, and I highly recommend you going and playing around with it. It is our, as Mike mentioned, free and open source adversary emulation platform, and it is a lot of fun. It acts like a malware vaccine, and it's really good way to continuously test your environment and your defenses on a real-time basis. So anyway, sales pitch done.
DIY malware, right? You check a couple of boxes and it behaves like different kinds of malware. And I think it's cool, and maybe
it's very cool. It is very cool, and we could have a whole episode just on that. So if you're interested, make sure you let us know. Write in, and we'll get Mike back up here for a full talk on Monkey.
Will we be able to use the same wardrobe? Or?
Yeah, yes, I think so. We'll have to get the matching pants next time too. Just have monkeys everywhere. So I feel like I say this every single episode, but it's going to be especially true today. We have a bit of a special episode. Things are going to be a little bit different. So typically I would go through, and the two of us would go through and talk about what has happened in the last 30 days. I am going to do a very quick snippet of some interesting things that came on, but then we are going to make a little transition, a drive, if you will, into the galactic empire of car wars. We'll get there, I promise. So really quickly, here are some interesting things that happened in the last 30 days in security. We had some interesting law enforcement updates regarding some attack groups. There were two former MIT students that were arrested for manipulating the Ethereum blockchain, stealing $25 million worth of cryptocurrency within 12 seconds. That's quite the read. There was also a breach forum seized by the FBI. I'm sure you all saw this. This was a pretty big day for us, for win for the defenders. So definitely check that out. And on our phishing, because there's always phishing, every single month there is phishing. So our phishing corner, I guess I should say, and there was a really interesting article about new DocuSign templates. That were, or I shouldn't say new DocuSign templates are being sold now. You can get them for about $10 USD if a threat actor isn't wanting to build their own. And it really mimics the same DocuSign template that we are all very accustomed to seeing if we use, say, file share. So that's a really good one to pass on to your maybe non-security minded colleagues to just be on the lookout, that there is a new blackmail business email compromise way coming in there. And last but not least, by any stretch of the imagination, is another phishing piece of research that we actually did, which was on the United States Postal Service. What we found was, according to DNS queries, on any given day, these phishing attacks, or smishing attacks usually, that are pushing to people to go to malicious sites pretending to be USPS, actually sees the same amount of traffic as the legitimate USPS site on any given day. And during the holidays, it like triples. So this is some really, really interesting research. It's all based on DNS queries. There were some very harsh parameters here that our data science team pulled together to avoid false positives in the research. So highly recommend you give that a read too. And that's effective. Well, that's not it. There was a lot of more that happened in security, but for our purposes today, that is it. So, welcome, rapid fire. And now, without further ado, may I introduce you to Car Wars. We are very excited to talk about this, particularly with Mike, because Mike has a role that is relatively new, which is a professor of data ethics of data collection. And so we're going to kind of play into our esteemed guests' strengths here and talk about some ethical data privacy collection ethics. Mike.
Yeah. Well, so don't overstate my position. I'm an adjunct professor at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. I teach, cybersecurity broadly. This semester I happen to be teaching ethics and cybersecurity. So it was interesting because this is a subject I've been researching. And one of the things that what happened this week is there was a large auto manufacturer and they had a breach and they lost something like 53,000 employee past and present employee records.
Yes.
So this got me thinking, because data privacy is something that I've been doing a lot of research about. And the idea of automakers being, hacked, at first it's not really anything special. But I was able to just kind of connect some things in my head. I had happened to be familiar with the privacy policies from some large automakers. And there was one that when I read it, I found shocking. And then when the automaker got breached, I was like, wow, right? What's the potential for this breach, right?
Sure.
And so I'll quote this directly out of the privacy policy from a large auto manufacturer. It's since been changed, so I had to go on Wayback Machine to actually find it. So maybe that change is a good thing. Maybe it's just now hidden. I don't know. But it says that so that some information they collect, sensitive personal information, driver's license number, national or state identification number, citizenship status, immigration status, race, national origin. Okay, all pretty standard stuff. You might wonder whether or not you really want your car company to have that. But here's where it gets weird. This car company says they also collect religious or philosophical beliefs, which is interesting, sexual orientation, and activity, precise geolocation, health diagnosis data, and genetic information. I'm not really sure how your car tracks your sexual activity, but I'm
not sure I want to know.
I don't want mine tracking and storing that.
That's so interesting. Thinking about how it's being collected, but also what the purpose is. Like, why would you need this amount of data? Sure. Especially, it isn't a B2C, context too. So you're talking about actual people's information, right? Not just business stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And you have to really ask, why is your auto manufacturer collecting that information? What purpose is it for? And they do state that it has a business purpose. They mentioned geolocation data. They also mentioned that it's shared with third parties for direct marketing purposes. They do tell you why they have that data. And it's another question as to really whether or not they should have that data and whether or not you want them to have that data.
Sure.
Right. And I think the way that the whole sort of data market industry runs is on this idea that, well, there was a terms of service and there was a privacy policy. And if you didn't like it, then, you didn't have to agree. But I don't know.
Right. Assuming that people read these. Yeah.
Who has time to read them?
I do.
But they're written in legalese, right? So unless you're a lawyer, just like in security, you talk to somebody, who's not a security person, and they kind of go like, "Wait a minute, I didn't understand any of the words that you just said."
Yes.
Right? Well,
it's as if you're speaking a different language.
Law is the same
or maybe
way.
You're from a different planet.
Law is the same way. So you can't just assume that because somebody was able to read your privacy policy that they were able to understand it. And on top of that, at least in the United States, and I think a large part of the Western world, we have what's called common law, which means that it's not just the written law, but it's also the opinions of courts based on those laws. Once a court issues a ruling.
The precedent.
Right, the legal precedent. So the rest of so unless you're a legal, you have time to get a law degree to really understand this terms of service or this privacy policy, and you have an encyclopedic knowledge of all of the relevant legal precedents. Even if you did read that terms of service or privacy agreement, I'm kind of skeptical whether or not the average person really understands the full implications of that. And then you have to ask, well, okay, so somebody consented to that. Is that informed consent? And that's, I guess, an open question that we haven't really resolved as a society.
Yeah, I would love for anybody watching to have opinions on this, because I think it's a very interesting topic. What does define informed consent, right? Does somebody clicking yes, I read it, does that count, or should it count? Maybe I think is a better answer or question, or rather. Something that came up when we were discussing this topic that I think is very important for us to mention is something that you had brought to the table, Mike, which was it's a very different ball game whenever you assume breach, right? So it's one thing for these companies to collect this data. It's a whole other thing for them to store it. And it's even more of one to make sure that it is secured, right? Because there are certain places where it would make sense to give this data, but an auto manufacturer may be not.
Yeah. I think, we all, as security people, we're all kind of like, yeah, it's not a matter of if, it's when, right? That's why we have threat hunters, right? Threat hunters, their job is to say, all right, we've been breached. What's the evidence of breach? None, but we're just going to pretend we have, and we're going to, do all sorts of cool stuff to try and root out, the breach. But so when you look at a data privacy policy, or when there are ethics officers, I'm not an ethics officer, right? I don't do this, so I'd love to hear opinions on it.
Yet.
Like I'm kind of like a security focused software dev, and I have this side gig where I'm discussing this with students, right? I imagine there's conversations happening with ethics officers where they say, is it ethical for us to collect this data? Is it ethical for this data to be used in this way? And like you said, what I don't know whether or not this is happening is there a conversation about, okay, cool, so we think it's ethical for us to collect this, we think it's ethical for us to use this. Well, what happens if we assume we're going to be breached, right? So we can have all the privacy policy in the world, but if we get breached and the data gets stolen, then the privacy policy no longer applies because we can't control the people who have stolen that data. So in light of that, is this still ethical? And to put this in kind of more like formal philosophical terms, Helen Nissenbaum is a professor from Cornell, and she put together this theory called contextual integrity. And it's a theory of privacy, and it has two kind of fundamental aspects. And one is norms of appropriateness, and the other is norms of distribution. So if we look at the case of the auto manufacturer who's collecting your religious affiliation and your genetic information, we can ask norms of appropriateness, like, is this appropriate information in this context? I think most of us would agree no. Right? But so in philosophical terms, let's pretend it is, right? What happens to my view of norms of appropriateness when my norms of distribution, right? This is the other component. Norms of distribution is it okay for me to share this when I assume that my norms of distribution are out the window because there's going to be a breach and it's going to be distributed in some way that I don't necessarily approve of.
Yeah. Distributed denial of service, one might say. That's a joke. That was a really bad joke. Don't do that. We'll cut this out in post. I can't believe we're already like at time. I could talk to you for hours. I usually do. So thank you so much, Mike. What an interesting question. Anybody who's watching this, I would really, really enjoy thoughts on comments on what we were talking about, because I think when we're talking about ethics in particular, it's super interesting, and especially when it comes to privacy, more and more of our lives are online every single day, and it can affect lives. It literally can affect lives when we're talking about certain technologies here. With that being said, I'm going to transition into our final hurrah here for today's episode. See me next month on the 26th of June. That will be episode 9 here. Any of our attachments that were discussed today can be found in the attachments tab per usual. So go read those. There's some really, really great articles. And of course, check out Infection Monkey's site. Any thoughts, comments, questions, jokes, even songs, I'm here for it. brighttalk@akamai.com. We love to hear your feedback. We want to make sure that the show is what you want to hear. So let us know any of your thoughts. They're all welcome. And thank you, as always. Cybernara, y'all.